Ai te iwi, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Pat, te Selwood, te committee, taku mihi atu kia koutou, tēnā no tātou katoa. Greetings, fellow Kiwis. Those Māori words for the Australians means your history on Saturday. Look, I know that my colleagues dressed far more professionally and modestly than I have been here today. But I'm from the earthy part of what makes up our coalition agreement, and when our Prime Minister Jacinda called me in allocating the cabinet portfolios, she asked if I'd take on infrastructure. My response was, of course, but be careful, number one, what you ask for. Number two, I don't want to be in a portfolio that just disappears into a political concrete mixer or has lots of policy seances in Treasury and other parts of the bureaucracy and doesn't get anything done. And if that's my future, then I'll retreat to being a retail politician and demonstrate that New Zealand First, as a part of this coalition government, is not a part of a tag and release scheme. We are here for the duration. So she empowered, along with Grant Robertson, me to bring back a proposal, which I'm going to share with you today. But first I want to acknowledge all of the stakeholders in the sector, and in particular the advocates who have been kind enough to enable me to get a better understanding on a day-to-day basis what the challenges are, and also our friends from Australia who took time not only to visit us in this regular conference, but who indulged me while I was in Australia recently. I don't generally read speeches. Being the Dalmatian Maori from Kaitaia, reared on oratory, I tend to regard that speeches should be delivered with flights of rhetoric. Grant Robertson, given that he's going to have to pay for this infrastructure, prayed that I would read a speech. So please indulge me. I would say that Building Nations, which is the name of the kaupapa, was really one of the motivations why, after a period of time in the Pacific, I came back into politics. Because it's something that historically we've done well, but as we've been through our ideological trajectories over the last 30-odd years, we've tended to arrive in a space that the Crown has often developed an inordinate sense of risk and aversion to be seen to providing rent seekers or the private sector with too many opportunities to make profit. And the private sector have become absolutely exasperated with the treacle-riddled approach from the bureaucracy to getting things done. And I find myself stuck in the middle of that conundrum. Well, it's one conundrum that I'm here today to partially answer. We have a number of very ambitious projects, not the least of which is the stewardship role I have for the $3 billion Regional Development Fund, but also our 1 billion tree program. And these are legacy investments, just as infrastructure must be seen as a legacy investment. Part of the $3 billion Provincial Growth Fund is going to be dedicated to infrastructure in the regions. Those are infrastructure demands that we fear may not be met as a cause of the ordinary functioning of government. So in some regions, and we have 4 surge regions, the West Coast, Taipōtini of South Island, Taitokero the North, Tairāwhiti the East, and Wanganui and Manawatu. And in each of those regions, specific endowments of capital will need to be made available, and obviously roads come to mind on the East Coast. Why I'm really keen that we lay out that as soon as possible, it gives confidence to the investors, the owners, the lobbyists and the workers in this sector that there is a medium to long-term future. I think that whilst us politicians guard jealously our decision-making rights, which we think we've inherited by dint of electoral success, I do believe that us politicians also need to project a sense of direction, a sense of institutional progress that gives you the confidence and you can see credibility in what we're doing. But I would remind us there's always a tension between the retail politician and the desire of the industry to see something that's credible that outlives the ebb and flow of politics. And I accept that challenge, and I think it's a very legitimate challenge for this particular long-lived sector, long-run sector, to put at the feet of whoever the government is that is in place. So what did I find? I found that New Zealand has no long-term infrastructure plan. Now, I'm not going to talk about the last regime or going right back when I was a minister with Helen. I'm telling you broadly what I found. The officials told me that I'm wrong to talk in this vein to you. There is a 30-year plan, or shall I say an 80-page glossy document. But the reality for me is that the document had lots of photos of ports, it had lots of shots of cranes, and given that I'm in the business as a politician, hopefully moving the Port of Auckland to Whangarei, the only thing I was interested in that document was a shot of the Whangarei port. I gave a good crack at campaigning on that, but my party only got 7%, so we're not making much progress on moving the port at the moment. In relation to the boom and bust cycles, a number of you have said, look, unless we have a longer period of certainty, unless you can show us how are we going to attract overseas firms to work with Kiwis so there's a clear sight and a clear sense of vision. And I take on board that the problems that you've helped me identify, well known, but each government has to be taught anew. And whilst that may sound a bit lame to you, it is an honest God fact. We come with our own agendas. We believe we've tested them amongst the voters who bestow upon us legitimacy to take the government. But whoever the government is, whatever complexion it shows, there are some perennial problems that I accept that I, as your infrastructure minister, need to start dealing forcefully and fiscally with. A lack of integrated investment decisions across central and local government. A lack of pipeline, scale and visibility. An overriding focus often on building new assets rather than the outcomes we've inherited or we're creating with the assets that we've got. And I include the most effective, if not efficient way to use the assets that the Crown owns. That obviously takes us immediately into where is the neon light ideologically each parties operate within. More on that in a mo. And I think one of the most disappointing features as the infrastructure minister I've discovered is the pretty haphazard, weird and often opaque way within which procurement works in Aotearoa. A number of you have said you have outsourced too much risk onto firms, believing that you're saving taxpayers from unnecessary liability, but in actual fact you're endangering the sustainability or the viability of major players in the sector that you're going to rely upon to do the heavy lifting to effect your infrastructure outcomes. I certainly hear that message from you. So after having met with Pat and the committee and having gone to Australia, a team of officials, and I have to acknowledge the Treasury people and John Ray in the audience, we set upon constructing a cabinet paper to secure the mandate of cabinet, and I can announce today that cabinet has mandated my announcement that our government is establishing a new independent infrastructure entity. You may now clap. It's something that you've called for, and it's something that, unless I could deliver, quite frankly, I didn't want to hang around in this portfolio. Because as a politician, I not only have my portfolio responsibilities, I'm a Kiwi, I'm a Māori, I'm from the regions, and I've got another mission as well. So I'm thankful that my senior colleagues have backed me. And really, I want to see this new body provide expert advice, planning, strategy, support the delivery of major infrastructure projects across the country, in particular at local government, also in central government. You infrastructure bods know that our central government is, the bureaucracy in our central government, we do operate from time to time in silos. I'm hoping that the infrastructure agency can act as the golden thread that ties a lot of our Crown investment and indeed private investment with the Crown and key infrastructure assets together. Without it, I'm not confident you're going to see over the next several years the kinds of changes or outcomes that you've told former governments and this government you want to see. I think it's necessary we create a one-stop shop. I think we need to link people together to deliver procurement outcomes. And we also need a place that can authoritatively indicate, explain, give lucidity to what are our regulatory and market settings. And where I feel particularly strongly about this is when I think of the lost and missed opportunities in Christchurch. I was actually, very few people actually believe it, but when I was younger, I studied and earned a degree from Harvard University and made many friends in the States. And I sought to bring those friends, former students, now successful business people, to New Zealand and to take a greater role in Christchurch. And look, it was just like a fog. It was an entangled skein of a mullet net, and they gave up and I gave up. And that's remained with me for a long, long period of time. We have committed to developing financing options to fund our projects that rely on innovation when we've just begun that journey. The agency will have every opportunity to help lead the Crown's thinking, and I'm conscious that people who may want to work in that agency do not feel comfortable working in the classic bureaucracy, and they sure as hell don't ever want to become politicians. So it needs a quality of independence, robustness that it attracts folk from the private sector as well as those from the public sector who know and understand the perils of being a good steward of public finance. Naturally, I've asked from time to time for Treasury to provide and quantify the deficit of our infrastructure, and I've struggled to find absolutely accurate and up-to-date information. And look, I don't blame anyone in Treasury for that. Probably I blame us, the politicians of earlier time, that we've used heroic rhetoric, but we really have not delivered with robust action. And hopefully by me announcing a funded and an independent agency today, that you'll have some confidence that this has been a long time coming, but rhetoric is meeting not only practical action, but some fiscal reality. Well, other things that I want the organisation to do is to pull together a long-term pipeline of infrastructure needs and work collaboratively with all of us ministers, with local government, and of course local government, they themselves are starting to dwell upon what exactly is their role. We, as you know, have an urban development authority which is being developed by Mr. Twyford, and it will enjoy extraordinary powers. We also are working on the three waters, and that is going to require me as infrastructure minister and us as cabinet ministers to dwell upon how do we build a capital base, an institutional base, a set of organisations to deal with the woeful performance we have in terms of our three waters. These are tough, hard political issues, but there's no point being in politics if we're just going to talk about them and inevitably go home and found that we actually did jack. I'm expecting that throughout now Treasury are being told, and my office is being told, look out, don't look in now endowing the institution with its necessary functions. The answers, I believe this as a pro-industry politician, I believe this as a Kiwi, as those of us who hold these positions of power, we've got to look out. The answers are within people like yourselves, except the small minority who should not put their hands up to join this organisation because the Aussies have already identified you as dickheads. Please watch the All Black game coming up. That will be the sweetest revenge of all for the chap from New South Wales. The final point I'd like to end on, once we launch this waka and we give it a level of independence that makes it credible for you guys, please bear in mind that politicians, although we come and go, we trade on believing that we're creating robustness and a brighter future and a greater vision for our tamariki for the next generation in New Zealand. So there is always going to be a creative level of tension. And to the extent that the Crown is funding certain projects, you will never strip politicians completely of their need to make decisions. But I'm a politician who's willing to moderate my zest for ultimate decision-making power and trade it for credibility amongst the providers of capital, the providers of labour, the providers of professional services, and the providers of robust, enduring assets. That's the Faustian pact that I've decided to come into by driving right through the Cabinet Committee process the outcome of this independent agency. It may sound something that is easy to do. If it was that easy, I want you to ask my colleagues on the other side of the House, why did they not do it themselves? Because I can tell you why Helen Clark never did it. I suppose one of the most challenging things for me as a Kiwi politician is let's ensure that this institution also takes the development of the people with it. Our procurement strategies, our investment strategies have to overcome the challenge of bringing people in and sending them home. And let's ensure that when you work with me to stand up this entity with a range of independence factors, with a range of functions you have confidence in, and with the right blend of people, we bear in mind that not only is it physical legacy assets that I hope to leave behind as a consequence of this decision today, but it's the legacy that will live on within our workforce, this generation and the next generation, so we can recover the spirit, quite frankly, of earlier generations of Kiwis that built the Benmore Dam, that built the infrastructure that you and I have taken for granted as Kiwis. Because I can tell you, with the Resource Management Act we have today, you would actually be enjoying light with candles rather than hydro energy. Thank you very much.
Minister, thank you sincerely for your announcement today. I'd have to say it was well anticipated, with your colleagues signalling and a lot of anticipation amongst the delegates here today, and your announcements in the paper yesterday. But it is something, as you know dearly, this organisation has been pushing for quite some time. The leadership void that we've had in infrastructure has been a deficit in its own right. And the courage of a government to actually contemplate the idea of independent thought leadership, I think is a bold one, but a really important one. And as we've travelled the world on our various delegations, we've seen the value of having independent advice, of thinking long term. And to pick up Paul Blair's presentation just prior to your arrival, Minister, to have the vision, governance and leadership in place, to have a long-term plan, to be able to fund the long-term plan, making sure we've got the right regulations and laws in place to enable the plan, and then to have the the procurement and delivery capability to deliver on the plan. If we can deliver through this agency and through great collaboration between the industry, government and the body, to really deliver to New Zealand's infrastructure needs, we will make an enormous breakthrough. So thank you, Minister, for your announcement today. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and we look forward to working with you in partnership. Thanks very much.
Folks, John Ray, who you would know, who I understand turned up drunk this morning from last night's whiskey, Given that he's busy in Gisborne, I can excuse him for that. He said, "Why are you wearing the black hat?" I said, "I'll give you the answer after the reaction from Mr. Selwood." Thank you for that reaction. I'm obviously not wearing, as Winston warned me, a funeral black hat. You like what I've had to say. Thank you very much.